What makes a movie is the editing.
I've been in the business for, I don't know, 37 years, I think, something like that. And I did not really realize what editing was until I was in the editing room myself.
There's magic to editing. Magic is a discovery of something new that wasn't intended, that works for the movie.
Once you start to realize that film is the sum of editing, then editing is the thing you're always looking at.
Showtime, folks.
I think great editing skill will protect a director from suicide.
The first filmmakers simply photographed what interested or amused them. They held a shot until they got bored, or the film ran out.
The fathers of cinema, Edison in the United States and the Lumiere brothers in France, were very pessimistic about the future of cinema. There was probably a worldwide interest in seeing these images move, but once you'd seen somebody playing a joke with a hose, why pay money to see something that you can see for real out in the street? In fact, Auguste Lumiere went as far as to say that cinema was an invention without a future.
But Edwin Porter, one of Thomas Edison's employees, proved him wrong. Porter discovered that cutting separate shots together could create a story.
Edwin S. Porter really was the one with the Life of an American Fireman, I think, that started intercutting and creating an emotional impact in the audience by intercutting two shots that are not related to each other. One scene is going on at one place, basically the firemen rushing to a fire with their horse-drawn wagons, and the other scene is the fire, miles away. And you intercut the two, and you understand psychologically and emotionally that these people's lives are in danger, and these people are coming to rescue them, and you're rooting all of a sudden for that to happen, and you're hoping they save the people. I often think about what it must have been like to be there to create the art form as it was happening and say, why don't we try this? That doesn't make any sense. I mean, we do it in the editing room now. We cut to something and say, well, that doesn't work. Well, imagine what they must have said in 1904.
The Great Train Robbery was Porter's next film. That's when you really begin to see the possibilities. And I'm not saying this because I'm an editor, but the invention of editing is the thing that allowed film to take off. It's the equivalent of the invention of flight. Both human-powered flight and motion picture editing were invented in the same year, and they have similar kinds of effects.
The invention of editing gave birth to a new art and a new language. A language that can transport us in the blink of an eye from the vastness of the desert to the mysteries of the human face. A cut can bridge millions of years, connecting the prehistoric past to an imaginary future. Editing can slow down time or speed it up.
You're
The timing of a cut can startle audiences.
I'm cleaning out a crooked laundry, see? Little do
Or
I know
amuse
it, but
them.
there's a dope fiend with a long knife trailing after me. I'm in great danger.
I'll never let go. I promise.
The choice and length of shots shape our response to everything we see on the screen.
And editing is why people like movies, because in the end, wouldn't we like to edit our own lives? I think we would. I think everybody would like to take out the bad parts, take out the slow parts, and look deeper into the good parts.
I started working on what used to be called the upright moviola, which is a machine, editing machine that looks something like a green sewing machine on legs. I switched to computer editing in the mid-90s. The editor has to be, he's sort of the ombudsman for the audience. As an editor, you only see what is on the screen, not what was going on at the time of shooting. And that's how it's going to look to the audience. I make it a principle not to go on the set, not to see the actors out of costume, not to see anything other than the images that come to me from location.
A major Hollywood production shoots almost 200 hours of film. Unspooled, the film would stretch from LA to Vegas. An editor may work for months, even years, crafting this footage into a 2-hour movie. The finished film will contain thousands of shots, each measured in frames of 1/24th of a second.
For a writer, it's a word, all right? For a composer or a musician, it's a note, all right? For an editor and a filmmaker, it's the frames, all right? And you know, the 1 frame off or 2 frames added or 2 frames less is the difference between a sour note and a sweet note. It's the difference between clunky, clumsy crap, all right, and orgasmic rhythm.
Verna Fields made many good contributions to Jaws. We all referred to Verna Fields as Mother Cutter because she was very earthy and very maternal. She cut her films at her house, in her pool house in the San Fernando Valley, and it was a very Hamish kind of workplace. The shark didn't work as well or as often as it was supposed to work according to the screenplay.
That's the spot.
We had a contest where Verna would stop the moviola on a frame where she wanted to make the cut, and I would stop it where I wanted to make the cut. And if ever we stopped it on the same frame that had already been marked with a grease pencil X, we knew that was the right frame on certain things where we didn't agree. And all of our disagreements always happened with that darn shark. Verna was always in favor of making less to be more. And I was trying to squeeze that one more, because it took me days to get the 1 shot. So I'm going back to, I'm on a barge for 2 days trying to get the shark to look real. And the sad fact was the shark would only look real in 36 frames, not 38 frames. And that 2-frame difference was the difference between something really scary and something that looked like a great white floating turd.
Out of my way.
Well, I got so desperate on Terminator 2, trying to shorten that film to a manageable length, as we all understand that to be, that I said, well, wait a minute, do we really need all these frames? If we just took out 1 frame every second for the entire film, we'd shorten the film by a couple of minutes. Let's just do it as a test. We'll take a reel, and we'll take out 1 frame in every 24. And the editors looked at me like I was nuts. Let's just try it. Come on, nobody's ever done this. We took out 1 frame in every 24, and it was a mess. There were jerks, there were things, there were cuts in the wrong places. You totally saw it, and it just didn't work. Every one of those individual frames was important. Once you know that as an editor, now you get scared for a while. It's like, geez, am I cutting here or am I cutting here? But then after a while, you start to realize that there's great power in that, too.
D.W. Griffith was the first great filmmaker to understand the psychological importance of editing. Working a decade after Porter, he did more than anyone else to advance the storytelling tools Porter had developed. Griffith invented and popularized techniques that established the basic grammar of film. His melodramas were the first to draw audiences into the emotional world of his characters.
He certainly was the first man to use the close-up in a big way.
This was revolutionary. It was so revolutionary that the producers, when they saw this, were aghast. They thought, you can't put this picture out like this. You can't cut to this big, ugly shot of somebody. First of all, we're paying for this actor, this actress. We want to see their whole body. We don't want to just see their face. Second of all, the audiences won't know what to respond to. They're going to be all confused. Well, the proof is in the pudding, and the reality is that the audiences were not confused at all.
Griffith brought it together in one magnificent film, Birth of a Nation, and we saw the accumulation of sort of 10 years of editing knowledge put into a movie. And all of a sudden, you had not only had close-ups, but you had flashbacks, parallel action, and you had all sorts of things that he used to make the audience, his attention focused on a certain part of the frame.
D.W. Griffith established the tenets of classical film editing. And classical film editing relied on the concept of the invisible cut, in which action would always be continuous and fluid and moving.
The goal was to mask the cut so the audience wouldn't notice and could forget that they were watching a movie. Let's take another look. Notice how the gesture matches from one shot to the next? Griffith's seamless editing is still practiced today and was the dominant editing style in Hollywood movies for decades.
At last.
Look again. The cut is so smooth that it's barely noticeable.
It's all for telling the story. And all you want to do is get the person emotionally invested in the story. So it becomes this invisible craft.
We call it the invisible art. And indeed, it is. I mean, the more invisible we are, the better we're doing our job.
Unfortunately, the invisible style of editing kept editors invisible and unappreciated as well. For years, they have been the best-kept secret of the movies. The first cutters were considered hands for hire rather than creative partners in the filmmaking process. They looked at the images by holding the film up to the light. Then they would check their work by running it through a projector and making the necessary adjustments. Griffith's main cutter was Jimmy Edward Smith, who virtually lived with him at the studio, where they worked far into the night, running the film shot during the day. Later, Smith's wife Rose joined the editing team. The Smiths married during the cutting of Intolerance. For their honeymoon, Griffith allowed them the weekend off.
Lights! Needs about 20 minutes out of it.
The Kazan film, The Last Tycoon, had a wonderful scene. It was obviously the story of Irving Thalberg. And I always took that as a wonderful metaphor about the editing process, that it's silent, it's anonymous.
What's that, are you asleep? Jesus, goddamn movie even puts the editor to sleep.
He's not asleep, Mr. Brady.
What do you mean he's not asleep?
He's dead, Mr. Brady.
Dead? What do you mean he's dead?
He must have died during...
He's dead. We were just watching the rough cut. Jesus, I didn't hear anything. Did you hear anything?
Not a thing.
Eddie, he probably didn't want to disturb the screening, Mr. Brady.
Today, not only is the editor still alive, but he has become the director's key collaborator. No other crew member spends as much time working alone with the director.
Finding the relationship with the editor is like trying to decide whether or not to get married. Because if the marriage isn't a good one, it's going to be a sticky divorce.
When I was doing my first movie, the only thing I knew is I wanted a female editor, because I just felt a female editor would be more nurturing to the movie and to me. I wouldn't try to be winning their way just to win their way, all right? They wouldn't be trying to shove their agenda or win their battles with me. They would be nurturing me through this process.
Come here! He's gonna kill me, man! It's fucking got that! Hey!
I think editors play a big role with directors in giving them support, making them feel like they can look at something that may have trouble or problems and be comfortable enough so that they can approach those problems.
Hi, Vincent. I'm getting dressed.
In the beginning, he really doesn't guide me, and then I put together what I think he wants. And pretty much we've worked together so long I can judge what he would want.
The fuck is this place?
This is Jack Rabbit Slim's. An Elvis man should love it.
Come on, man, let's go get a steak.
You can get a steak here, Daddy-O. Don't be a...
Oh, after you, kitty cat.
Initially, I had it like really long. It was like a date in real time, all right? And it was sort of like Sally's job to kind of like, you know, little by little convince me to bring it down and bring it down and bring it down. And it still could be funny. You would still have what I'm talking about, but maybe it wouldn't be so painful.
He did want it to feel very much like a date, and it was very long at first, and we just had to kind of live with it for a while.
Just like, you know, letting me live with it long enough so I could eventually, okay, I've had it enough, I've seen that enough, okay, maybe now I can lose this part. Okay, so now it was like here and now it's like here.
Finally, we'd bring it down, and then I kind of brought it too far down, and then he said, we got to bring it back out.
That's it. No more, no more, no more, no more. This is not a video.
We do that for 8 months, so intense. I see him more than my husband.
And sometimes I, you know, get annoyed with her for not reading my mind 100%. I mean, all right, you know, it's not good enough that she reads it 80% of the time, all right?
We work very intensely together, and it's kind of amazing that we still like each other. If I was with my husband that long, I don't think I'd like him that much. So
By the time I've thought of an idea, written it, found the financing, cast the film, directed it, I get to the cutting room and it's like I've washed up on shore. Because I'm so happy to be there, because then I think, now we can start making the film.
It's so hard to be a director, and it's hard on the set. By the time they come into the cutting room the first week, they're usually half the people they were when they started out. You know, they're shells of the people they were. And at least in my cutting room, I try to make it very easygoing and try to heal them back into shape so that they can get to work on the movie.
When Matthew Broderick is busted from having thrown the election, he enters the principal's office and sees all the people gathered there who know he's guilty.
Mr. McAllister, I hope you can help us clear something up.
He wanted to cut it like the end sequence of The Good and the Bad and the Ugly, with holding on the faces for a really long time with this swelling music. I was like, no, let's cut it really fast and build to a climax.
And I didn't want to do that. I thought it was cheesy and would call too much attention to itself.
And he just wouldn't want to do it. He wouldn't want to put it in the movie like that. So finally I said, I'll pay you $25.
And I said, no, let's not do that.
I go, okay, 50.
And I said, no.
He's like, no.
And I said, 75.
So he even gave me an invoice, and it says I owe him $75. So I paid him $75 to cut it in, and that's how it is now.
I think successful editors are really sly politicians.
The Russian Revolution sparked a revolution in film editing as well.
The crazy Russians start fucking around with images, all right, and juxtaposing them and creating different emotional effects.
Lenin saw film as the perfect medium to inspire his largely illiterate nation to join the revolution.
They took these films out in the middle of farmlands and showed it to the farmers and the peasants. They began to understand that they could get a certain emotional, psychological effect by a certain type of cutting from one image to the next. And that became a manipulation of what the audience was feeling.
The Russian filmmakers rejected the bourgeois stories and seamless editing practiced by Griffith. Instead of melodrama, they offered real life. To make the film Man with a Movie Camera, documentary filmmaker Dziga Vertov and his team took his cameras into the streets to record a typical day in Moscow.
It's constantly reminding me that I'm watching a movie. There are scenes inside an editing room. You see how they edited movies back in 1929. They were engaged in a pure explosion of creative activity in manipulating these images. Every modern editing convention that we know of is demonstrated in Man with a Movie Camera.
The film celebrated not just the revolution, but the role of the cameraman and the editor in helping to create it. Vertov and his wife, Elizaveta, cut their documentaries and newsreels in dark basements with rats scuttling underfoot. But in this film, he made the editor as important as any other worker in the revolution. The theoretician Lev Kuleshov also experimented with film editing. In his most famous study, he took a shot of a Russian